Hello and welcome to a special edition of Inside Sports as it's Black History Month. I'm Todd Blackstock. On today's show, we've got a true St. Louis treasure we're going to interview today. So stay with us for Inside Sports, coming up next on STL TV. And welcome back to Inside Sports. Joining me now at the ripe old age of 103, baseball legend and Nate Crump. And Nate, thank you so much for joining us here on Inside Sports on our Black History Month edition. And you grew up in quite an era back in the Depression, and you went to Sumner High School. Can you give us a little, a little look at growing up in St. Louis back in the day?
Well, back in the day, I grew up, there were not the privileges or many of the things that we have today. It was a matter of family and just enjoying the family and getting what we do in terms of education, schooling. In our selected schools, we were limited on the number of schools that we had available to us, but it was a great life because it was a family. It was more of a family, depended on what you had as a family. I had a wonderful father, and he died pretty early, but he left a lot of memories in my mind and a guide for living. One of the things that he instilled in me and my two older brothers was that even though things are rough for us, we're treated poorly. He said, when you grow up, you treat people like you would want to be treated. And some of those things will come back to you. And over the years they have. And so that was what it was like as a kid. I went to Marshall School and Sumner High School. And
Well, there's a lot of people at Sumner High School that were pretty famous back in that era, wasn't there?
Yes. Hudlin, who brought in Arthur Ashe as a tennis player. There were others.
You know, Elson Howard and you had some crossing of paths over the years.
Well, Elson Howard, at that time, we had three schools: Sumner, Vashon, and a technical school. That was all that was available to us at the time. McKinley and Soldan, all those schools we not even played with sports with. But as we grew older, the things changed. And I grew up from Marshall, went to Sumner, and then spent a couple of years at Stowe Teachers College. And in fact, I was supposed to be in the first class of boys who, at that time, men could only go 2 years. The teachers were primarily women. There were a few men teachers. And so I went for the 2 years, and then they opened it up to go 4 years and become teachers at that time. But then service came in, and I went to Lincoln University, and from there I went to the service. And then I came back to Lincoln University, had a degree in chemistry.
Can you maybe tell us a little about your time in the Negro Leagues and playing some exhibitions with the Monarchs and how
Yeah,
that
well,
was?
at that time, it was we didn't have any kind of organization like a league. At Tandy Park, Sunday was the day that was baseball was played, had several teams, but it wasn't a league because there were teams downtown on the other side of Grand going east. There was a line of, you didn't cross that line unless you were prepared to duke it out. So there was a Tandy League, if you want to call it that. And then there was a league where people like Elston Howard played. And so that was east of Grand Avenue, which was sort of like the embarking line. Those who lived in that area east of Grand basically went to Vashon. Those who live west of Grand Avenue primarily went to Sumner, and especially those people who lived in an area that I lived in called the Ville, which included the area now where Homer Phillips and Sumner High and Stowe Teachers College and some of the schools like that.
So what about playing in the in some exhibitions? I know you said that you had met Dizzy Dean, and he pulled you off to the side and kind of tried to rest you assured.
Well, at that time, I had a request to come and play an exhibition game with the Monarchs. My name had been submitted to them because I was a pretty good hitter and a decent baseball player. And so the Monarchs asked me to come and play an exhibition game with them. Well, at that time, apparently they had also asked Elston Howard to come, and they also at that time had just released Hank Thompson and Willard Brown from the St. Louis Browns. And so I played there in the exhibition game with the team that Dizzy Dean had gotten together. And as it turned out, he was very encouraging to me and Elston. He took us aside and told us, this is an ordinary game. Don't be nervous and just get out and play. Said, do what you can do. And then he told us about how he got teams together to barnstorm against Satchel Paige and others in the Negro League, which was available at that time. And
What about Satchel Paige? What was he like?
I only met him once. I didn't get to play with him. And at the time that I met him, he was not with the Monarchs. Satchel Paige was an independent person. He didn't really, as I understand it, he didn't really belong to any team. He was where he was needed and could make some money. And he was very independent.
What about Cool Papa Bell? He was a pretty fast guy, wasn't he?
Yes, I'm glad you. There are so many jokes out about Cool Papa Bell. He could turn the light out and get into bed before the room got dark. But the one that I like about Cool Papa Bell is that he laid down a perfect bunt down the third base line, and he got tagged out as the third baseman was getting ready to try to throw him out at first. So he was pretty fast. But they have a street in all that area now in St. Louis where named after him. And when I was very young, my dad took me to see them play. And it was, at that time, there was a Negro League. And it had declined from the time when, in the 80s, when the ball player managers and all got together and decided that there would not be any black players on the team. And so that Negro League and all didn't start up again until 1920, that area.
It must have been pretty tough playing in the Negro Leagues, although I understand the Negro Leagues was one of the biggest black businesses in the country.
Absolutely.
And I mean, the ball players in the Negro Leagues, didn't they stay at some of the finer places and, you know, have some of the nice restaurants provided to them? But in some towns, it probably wasn't always that way.
Well, it wasn't a lot of money, but it was a big amount of money for the players in terms of what was available. But as I understand, even with all that, it was pretty difficult to travel around at all the places because there were no accommodations for you. And unless you knew someone who would take you in, then you had to make a makeshift and stay in a bus. And very few restaurants would accommodate you. But the league was a growing thing, and many people benefited by it. And then the league actually was eventually torn apart because all of the best players were recruited by the National or American League, which then put the Negro League into poverty. And so, as it is now, they are no more really, like you know, there are just a few, and they're almost like independent leagues. So, but that's the way that I understand it.
Folks, we're going to take a quick break now, but stay with us as our conversation with Nate Crump will continue, coming back on Inside Sports.
When we found out that we were pregnant, we were just elated. We were just sitting there waiting for the pediatrician. She said she won't be taking you in as a client.
We are a lesbian couple, but she's just a baby. She's the one you're denying the service to.
Hi. Hoping for a crisp breeze to help keep you alert. Oh, he took a sip of water too. That'll probably help. You were probably gonna turn down the radio too, so you could focus, right?
Probably okay isn't okay.
Right?
If you see a warning sign, stop and call a cab, a car, or a friend.
I think the water line is what really drove it home. I blew on him.
Hey, welcome back to Inside Sports. I'm Todd Blackstock. We're joined with Nate Crump. Nate is an individual who skipped the Negro Leagues for NASA. Nate, tell us a little bit about that, because you got an opportunity to play in the Negro Leagues, but you foregoed that, and you went a different direction, didn't you?
Yes, I finished Lincoln University, and there was a fellow, a Dr. Duguid, who opened up a laboratory in St. Louis. And there were a few blacks in that field and in that business. So he asked me to come and join him and learn the business. Well, by the same token, I was asked by the Kansas City Monarchs to play in the exhibition game. Well, the thing is that I refused to play with the Monarchs because I had been offered this opportunity to come to this laboratory. Incidentally, the man was a black chemist and was at a new adventure. So I went to work with him. Actually, I went to work for him for nothing. Basically, he said he could not pay me. But if I wanted to come to the laboratory and learn the techniques of chemistry in certain areas, then I was free to do so. But he couldn't give me the job because he was just starting as well. And later on, he was able to give me the job. And I worked with him for 4 years. But that was the story of why I refused to go with the Monarchs, because this was something that I thought I wanted, and I'd spent all my time with it, and was the only thing that I seemingly had an inkling for, was science and chemistry in particular.
Well, can you tell us a little bit about some of the accommodations you got from some of our leaders of the United States and some of the great things you did with NASA? Some of the recognition.
I worked at McDonnell Douglas and was actually McDonnell Company when I first went there. But then this was during the space program. And, well, before I got there, I need to tell you that story. When I went through, in the early days, as integration began to come along, I was asked by the Urban League to go and work for a company Universal Match. And then I went on through Universal Match and finally went to McDonald because I had done some work that McDonald needed in terms of testing the materials that were exposed to the fluids that were used to launch the spacecraft. And so I worked out a procedure of testing that, and then I was asked to get into the field of contamination, which NASA needed. And so where NASA is involved, McDowell had the first 2 contracts in space to build the capsule. And that's where I went out to work to McDowell to do this testing. And from then on, went to all the other spacecrafts, Apollo, Gemini, Skylab, and all those. So I'd worked out a procedure of how to determine cleanliness, because it was certainly needed in space. You didn't want to get out and find out something that you didn't know what it was in terms. So that's what I worked out the field for contamination and for NASA.
And that's our show for today. And we'd like to thank Ed Wheatley for making this show possible as well. And of course, Nate Crump, a 103-year-old trailblazer from right here in the Loop. Thanks for watching Inside Sports on STL TV. I'm Todd Blackstock. Have a great day.